Good evening. Good evening and welcome very, very much to Conversations, where I'm pleased and honored, if I may say so, to welcome to the program Mr. John McConnell. And Mr. McConnell is a long-term person here on planet Earth that's had a long-term concern for the whole of planet Earth in an ecologically responsible way. And John McConnell, welcome very, very much to Conversations. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Harold. I'm glad to be here.
You, as I say, you along with Margaret Mead, I think, helped start this Earth Day that is being observed on a worldwide scale now, and you're now chairman of the Earth Society Foundation and have had a long-term concern with the fate of the Earth, as it were, in a large, ecologically responsible sense. I wonder if maybe you could share a little of your own personal background. You've been involved in these kinds of questions for a good part of your career and your development, but maybe you could share a little of your own personal background, if you might.
Well, years ago, I was in partnership with a chemist. We had a research laboratory in California. George Pepperdine was a third partner.
Mm-hmm.
And then before that, my father was an evangelist, and I had a religious background where I was concerned about how we could see the ethical and moral change to the care of our planet. And then the thing that really triggered I would say, my whole life since then was in 1957 when the first Sputnik was launched.
Yes.
I was following the space program, and I was publishing a newspaper in North Carolina, the Tow Valley View. And I came out that week with an editorial, "Make our satellite a star of hope, a visible star in the sky that'll inspire cooperation worldwide."
Yes, I understand.
And my editorial was picked up at the wire services, and hundreds of stories and editorials were written all over the world about it. I was invited to see Mrs. Roosevelt, and I later flew across the country with Wernher von Braun. I went to the Atoms for Peace conference in Geneva the next year and advanced this proposal.
This idea of the Star of Hope,
the idea
or
of
the
the
idea
Star
of
of Hope,
peace,
right.
sadly, yeah.
So anyway, I would say that it was from then on that I started thinking globally.
Yes,
There have been great transitions in human history. We go back to the time of Galileo, and suddenly there was a great increase of consciousness of where we are, who we are, and our universe. And I think we're going through a similar transition now. I wish it would happen faster.
Yes. Some people have said that it might be that we're gestating. I was just chatting with you off camera. Whenever this adventure started, there is some evidence now that it might have been, from whatever evidence, there's different ways of seeing it, maybe a couple 100,000 years ago, the human species may have first appeared. Various people have readings on that from religious scripture and from scientific evidence and so forth. But one thing we were also chatting is that we've reached a point now with the extension of our technology, with the extension of our incredible capability, we've reached a point where so much of that has been destructive that with atomic, hydrogen, bacteriological, chemical warfare capabilities, apparently, and I'm not sure if this is scientifically validatable or is out in the literature, we've apparently reached a point now, after however long the human scenario has been, the point where we truly do have within this Promethean capability within our own hands to literally destroy the habitat that could support the species, so that we reached a point that we have never had throughout the human history. And I wonder, in your investigations, do you think we have in fact reached that point where we have the power, literally, of our own species-wide destruction in our hands for the first time in the evolution of human affairs?
I don't think there's any question of that. I believe a poll among leading scientists around the world would support it. Perhaps there has been something of this kind. But at the same time, we have two sides to the situation. While our ability to destroy has increased geometrically, on the other hand, our capability for renewing the planet has tremendously increased. I just was talking with Mrs. DuBose here the other day.
Oh, yes.
Renee DuBose's wife.
Yes.
And he, incidentally, was one who rang the peace bell. She rang the peace bell one Earth Day right after his death, but he helped us in the beginning of Earth Day.
Yes,
And one of the things about him was he was so aware of all the problems, but he was an incredible optimist. He felt that nature's ability to restore and renew was almost incredible, and that we still had not reached the point of no return. Now, I have talked with, I have heard of scientists, at least. I'm trying to remember if one specifically has said this to me, but anyway, there is talk that we may have already reached the point of no return. But that's assuming that man is incapable of making changes rapidly enough. I think with our modern technology, and especially in communications, that we might, in a matter of a few weeks, months, or years, just turn completely around from earth kill to earth care and start functioning as trustees and caretakers of a fabulous planet.
And yet we would be turning around from a course that you can see now in terms of geopolitical realities where we are now, and given the historical institutions, given the historical political leadership as it manifests among the great and lesser powers, still of great power in their own right and so forth, we are now in a course of earth kill at the present moment as you and I sit and talk, and we've not made that kind of a breakthrough or understanding that could, in a certain sense, lead to this new way of operating this spaceship Earth that Buckminster Fuller used to refer to?
We've made the breakthrough here and there. There are little pockets of progress. Whether you think of the new alchemists up in Boston,
yeah.
some of the things that they are doing, or in fact, in organic farming and in new sources of energy, I would say that not only in this country but in certain places all over the world, there are individuals, small groups, who are demonstrating the kind of way that the planet, the people on our planet should live. Now, if we could change media so that we had headlines and excitement about the cures and about the answers, instead about all of the terrible things, all of the problems. In fact, I published a newspaper, and I feel that unless media can find some way to equal their destructiveness in publicizing all of the crime and cruelty and
political malfeasance and lack of vision.
All of this, unless they can balance it with real excitement about the care of Earth, about the efforts for peace, why, we have no future. Our real problem is communications.
Really, the power of communications is becoming, the power of destruction is growing, as we said. The power of communication, in fact, technology in general, is growing also, so that we have a capability of perhaps providing livingry, as Dr. Buckminster Fuller would have said, for the planet in a way that is perhaps historically unprecedented. Do you think we have at our hands the possibility of creating an Earth political, economic system that could be predicated on something other than the general assumption of scarcity within which all of our human institutions have evolved? And is perhaps that concept one that is an important one in order to begin to move toward the geopolitical structure that could make for the kind of peaceful, almost millennial averse side to the destructive scenario in a large sense? I just wonder.
Yes, well, I remember we talked about 2-year bimillennium in the year 2000. And we are at a critical point now of either, I feel, being destroyed completely, and maybe, as you say, having a planet that will be a dead planet. And incidentally, I've mentioned the Star of Hope. One very pessimistic scientist said, he said, that sounds like such a terrible idea. Imagine that little twinkling star of hope circling our dead planet.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
But as I say that, I feel that the people who are experiencing awareness, deep felt awareness of our planet and our responsibility to be trustees and caretakers of it, and then who are thinking about how they can demonstrate the alternatives and providing food and homes and energy. We can have clean energy now. The solutions are here, but we're neglecting them. And on the other hand, technology, the improvements that we enjoy in a good American home can be not only widespread, but can cover the planet. I remember Bucky Fuller saying some of the studies that he'd made in their computer studies that every family on Earth could have the equivalent of a $50,000 a year income if we were using our knowledge and our resources in a practical way. So I think that the answer is simply this. Any individual who's awakened to the most important issue in the world, and that is how we can stop Earth kill and provide Earth care, how we can act as trustees of a marvelous planet. If that individual will make a commitment. Well, they're going to do what they can. Well, that's not going to make any difference. If I just change my pattern of living and I start, when I go into the marketplace, I try to avoid the things that I know are going to cause pollution or waste. And when I invest in the marketplace or in the stock market, I'm going to choose the things that will help the planet. If we start making those kind of decisions. Now, if you decide right now, today, anybody listening to this program, that they are going to try to be a trustee of planet Earth, and reinforce that by their religious faith or by whatever means they can, if you who are listening, if you get one person in the next week or month to go along with you and you start talking and planning together how you can be trustees of planet Earth, and then that person gets two more, and then that person gets two more, you start doubling it exponentially. Well, you only have to double it 32 times till we have everybody on our planet.
Yes, right. You would have, if you could get that and get a common agreement on ground rules, as it were. Or
That's right.
What would you say to people who would argue that in a certain, I suppose you've been accused over your long and illustrious career of having a little bit of an idealistic streak to you, and not being practically minded to all of the so-called political realities that make all of this impossible and so forth. But I mean, what would you say to the people who would say that well, you're trying to create a world that runs counter to human nature, for instance? They will say human nature is inherently selfish, greedy, self-seeking, and all of these things that are being so lauded now in so much of the society that you're asking you're asking people to run against their human nature, and there's no point in going down that path. We have to have systems to protect ourselves from our own nature, as it were.
I think there are many leaders in philosophy and in science who would contend that our problem is not the nature of humanity. Our problem is unawareness of what we can do and how we can act. And I think that there's a combination of things here. Person-to-person communication and persuasion that let's be trustees of planet Earth is important. Visible symbols are important. By the way,
yes.
The Earth flag back here, this is flown from the South Pole, and it's been flown on the QE2 when we had Isaac Asimov and a group of other people on a cruise.
Yes.
And I get calls from Australia, from England, other places, asking about how they can get an Earth flag. Now, the strange part about it is, and maybe you can answer this question.
I don't know. Try. Yeah.
Here we have a few people here and there who are so excited about the idea of being trustees of planet Earth, of flying the Earth flag, having an Earth Care project, and not labeling this Republican or Democrat or communist or capitalist, but rising above that, transcending that. We're going to be trustees of planet Earth, and we can pursue that goal in different ways and stress the things that we have in common worldwide. Be aware of the difficulties of our differences. I don't mean to ignore that, but I do believe that speaking about the Earth flag again.
That's certainly something we have in common, right?
Right.
Yes,
the Earth is something we have in common. And one of these days, I hope some millionaire will come along and we'll produce and market it in a way that'll see the Earth flag flown in every city and every school and every church all over the world.
Such a concept could rise above narrow nationalism, which is a problem existing in the world and so forth. And so many of the inherited institutions that, in a certain sense, bode ill if they continue to play out their pattern. Are you becoming more, if I may ask, more or less optimistic, as it were, concerning the human condition through your own lifetime, as it were? I mean, do you understand the thrust of what I'm saying? I mean, you fought a hard fight. I know you battled, but...
I feel a contradiction here.
Yes.
On the one hand, if I look at all the terrible things that are happening and the way the human race is going, you'd throw up your hands and say it's a hopeless case. Now, on the other hand, if you look creatively for signs of change and for demonstration of cures and solutions and answers, you get excited. You think, well, maybe we can save the planet for our children and for our future generations. And once we have the spark of that hope, then I think we should individually do everything we can to support efforts that, again, would diminish the pollution, waste, and destruction of Earth, and along with it, the things that deprive individuals of their inheritance in our planet. Let me speak about that just for a second. One Earth Day, we had at the United Nations children chanting the words from the Psalms. The earth hath he given to the children of men. And back of that is the concept that the earth, the natural earth, I don't mean the things that people have produced. If you produce something from your hard labor, why, I'm not saying that it belongs to the poor people. On the other hand, as far as the soil, the land, the oil, and the natural treasures of the earth, there's some sense of a claim, I believe, of every individual. This isn't socialism or communism. This is, well, people like Henry George have come forward with this idea. And Eisenhower was in support of it. Many leaders have, but we've neglected this
sense of
kind
birthright.
of thinking. A birthright. Earthright. An earthright or
Earth
birthright.
birthright, right?
So if we would really pay attention to that and see to it that the people in Bushwick in Brooklyn that are having a problem surviving from day to day and are homeless, that there's going to be an effort to see that they get their earthright or birthright in our planet.
And to carry that out on a worldwide scale, where if we look at things, we see a great deal of injustice in terms of the human condition as we currently look out over the world, don't we?
There are many proposals that have been advanced in land reform and other things. I have my own proposal called Earth Bounty Program. But I believe that it's possible to guarantee every child on our planet a homestead, a viable place to live, where he can have the advantages of the security of a home. And if that was our first priority, you know, if instead of being so concerned about the boundaries of countries, we were concerned about providing boundaries for every individual to have their little stake in our planet.
Yeah, that's right. Probably most people, if you were to ask them whether they would be concerned with those political questions or the economic questions, they would probably, and most people would probably be concerned about the economic securities, and that's one thing that they're concerned with. And political social systems keep people insecure in order to keep them under control, don't you think? So that there might be people who are in positions of authority or control for our inherited institutions who would just assume people not be in a prima facie way secure in the world because they're easier to control and manipulate, do you think? Do you understand?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Speaking about do you understand?
One of the great problems here, any good program that comes along, there's somebody standing on the sidelines who will try to twist and manipulate and use it for their own advantages. I remember I had friends who attended the peace conference, the youth peace conference in Europe. This was years and years ago, and I'll never forget that here it was such a great idea of youth of the world to work for peace. And when they got there, they discovered it was being manipulated to really mean that we must work for peace, and the only way to have peace is communism. So there's always the danger. But with our record and our progress and understanding in recent decades, I believe that we could be aware of these dangers and avoid them. But I think that, again, there is more than ever before in my lifetime a real concern about changing our attitudes and making compromises that are needed to provide a viable future.
Well, if we take that, as we suggested earlier, where we said that we've reached, after the whole of the human experience, we've reached a time where in this generation, it's probably the oldest saying in the world that these are interesting times of change, but it's true, the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th century, 19th, Second World War, we didn't have the kind of Promethean capability that we do in this very generation as a time of decision in such a way that has never been throughout the human experience, if you can understand what I mean. We never were at a point where we could literally destroy ourselves, or perhaps open upon, almost in a birth-like, millennial kind of sense, open upon a new way of being that would be almost transcendent to that which we've been throughout the human experience, almost at a time of transcending history or leaving the womb of the human experience, something on that order, which makes this an incredibly challenging time, and few enough voices are trying to keep a large-term view of our role in terms of the larger evolution of events in the universe than yourself. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well,
This is really a completely unique time.
In line with that, we are going through the rites of change. And
birth, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean the society, if you use that analogy in reference to the whole planet. In fact, I remember in Geneva when I was there with the Star of Hope in '58, one of the things they picked up from what I said was that we've either got to grow up or blow up. So
quite literally true, right?
This is very literally true today. There must be a more mature, a greater maturity among our leaders and in public opinion in order for us to have a future. Part of that is to think ahead more. When people go into the stock market, they want to make killing tomorrow.
That's right.
If we passed a law that you could not realize any profits from your investment until you waited 5 years, why would there be a
more patient capital?
There would be much better choices made. So in general, in fact, I remember Governor of North Carolina when I was down there. He said he set up a team to plan the affairs of North Carolina for the next 50 years.
Long time,
but in our political system, we tend to only think about the next 2 years, or at the most 3 or 4. So that's part of the problem. But I again believe that the greatest good that could come would be if there was a change of heart globally. I think it's possible. Where people felt that we have a beautiful planet with tremendous possibilities, and that we're all trustees of it. We're responsible for it, and we should be living in a world where we're benefiting from its natural bounty.
Do you think perhaps a great number of the people who do not feel that a sense of trustee is a sense of a high responsibility that might, in a certain sense, I'm not being cavalier, might be in a certain sense easy to do if one themselves are comfortable. Many people who are not comfortable themselves have a hard time getting a sense of trusteeship when they're doing all they can just to keep themselves and perhaps their immediate family afloat, as it were. It's a difficult process for people who are not comfortable, as it were, to have a true sense of trusteeship. Maybe I'm off base on that, but if you understand what I mean.
Well, you're partly right. I think, of course, that is a problem. But one of the things that amazes me, I live in Bushwick in a very poverty-stricken area, and some of the people who are doing the most along the lines that I'm talking about are the most deprived. Well, of course, you have the examples in a Mother Teresa or in many religious settings where people, once they are fired with a vision, why they, whatever their circumstances, they make a commitment and they follow through on it. I know in our own Lutheran church in Glendale, there's a surprising number of people who give 10% of their income to the church. To tithe. Now, my goodness, if we could get people nationwide and worldwide to give 2% or 5% of their income to Earth Care projects, we'd have a great future.
Well, if they could get them to Earth Care projects, some people don't want to give to Tammy Baker and other kinds of misuses of religious institutions are part of the institutional structure we've inherited. Political institutions we've inherited. We've inherited a great number of institutions from a historical context. Again, back to that idea that throughout all of the human experience there has been, as a basic premise among the leaders of the world, whether religious, philosophical, or what, a basic premise of insufficiency or scarcity was the reality in which one had to make decisions. We said earlier that the adverse side, perhaps, of the destruction is a realization of sufficiency, perhaps initially, and then perhaps even on into abundance. Surplus and abundance as a reality within which human institutions could be formulated. And it would seem as though that would be an almost necessary projection of future, if there is to be a future for us, that we're going to make that transition, that there is enough for all and to build institutions predicated on that assumption. But people who are in the leadership position in most of our institutions are presiding over institutions all predicated on the assumption that there is not enough among the nations of the world and so forth. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Maybe epistemologically there's a transformation taking place that the political systems have not yet caught up with, or something of that sort.
I think what you're talking about is terribly important. And once we straighten out the dishonesty and secrecy and inhumanity in our methods of handling property, and also in credit and money.
It's very, very tilted towards just those at the top.
Absolutely.
I think in the American experience, for instance, I think it's just about all with the exception of some pension plans, it's virtually the technology, which is perhaps responsible for 80% of our production and trending that way with robotics and so forth, is virtually all owned on an individual basis by about 5% of the population. Heavy concentration in the upper 2%, and most all people only have to have a labor relationship to production that is increasingly becoming technological.
I think the way to deal with the problem there of concentrations of wealth is to recognize the inheritance of every individual in his planet.
How do we do that?
Well,
Politically.
in my Earth Bounty program, if my goodness, if I can find one banker or one industrialist who would start the
ball rolling.
Well, what I suggested, and I guess I can explain it here on the program, but it's simply this, that if you have more than, say, $50,000 in assets in raw land or in raw materials, oil or gold or whatever, then whatever you have in excess of that, you are using your neighbor's property.
How do we arrive at the 50,000?
That's an arbitrary figure, but I did a little bit of study to...
That's not very much.
No, but that could, it would certainly amount to that. Looking at the value of raw land without improvements and of the oil that we have underground and other natural assets. Now, if every individual who had more than $50,000 in natural assets were to pay a 2% royalty, I don't say dividend, I say royalty, because since it's the claim to it is the claim of all humanity, they should be getting some payment for the use of their asset. Now, if that 2% were to go into a fund that would begin with pockets of poverty and provide homes for the homeless, provide a homestead stake for those for the disinherited poor, that could create a wave of excitement around the world if they could see that very soon there would be no more homeless people.
Well, why couldn't we go that through just a political process and tax the rich and distribute it to the needy through a traditional governmental process of distributing the wealth?
Well, I believe that the concept of planetary inheritance needs to be understood and to be part of such a program. And not only that, but I recall as a young man, I was very much taken with a man who was a derelict, and all of a sudden he surprisingly inherited a house from a distant relative, and it changed him completely. He was a homeowner. Well, you find a different way of thinking among people who have a clear title to a home.
Oh, yes, right.
And so I think what I've just outlined would be the most feasible way to eliminate homelessness worldwide and would avoid the problem of political manipulations that get involved in welfare.
Yeah, do you think the general proposition that everyone ought to own their own needs is one that makes some good sense? That people should own their own needs? That would be a general premise that, so that they don't have to earn it, they don't have to have it given to them by the state, they own their own needs and have a degree of sovereignty over their own existence is a general proposition that could be perhaps agreed to by the peoples of the world. You're looking for areas of common agreement among the peoples of the world. I just wonder if that's...
Yeah, well, I think along with that, of course, you'll have those who are concerned about destroying the incentives of people to work and to contribute to their own welfare, and that must be kept in mind. But no, I think that we need to work on both fronts, both the assurance that might come to an individual that he's a property owner, he has a stake in our planet.
It's not going to be taken away by some arbitrary decision of some private or government agency.
That's right.
Yeah.
And at the same time, that he has a responsibility. Again, we have to combine. We used to have a little button that said, Earth, my inheritance, my responsibility. So we've got to combine those two elements in a healthy program for the future. But I think that if we educated people from infancy on up, that they were trustees of a beautiful planet, and that every individual had a role in taking care of this planet, and he had an inheritance in this planet. If that combination is presented right, well, I believe it could change attitudes, and again, we would think instead of Earth kill, we would think of Earth care.
Are you optimistic that we're going to be able to arrive at this kind of a condition? And we said earlier that we're going to be able to move into a condition of surplus. If we were to have an Earth organization, and we were thinking now where these needs were met and it was where there was Earth care, would this have to be done in a manner where people would have to, in a certain sense, lower the individuals who had a sense of trusteeship for the Earth and so on, would lower the vision of their material well-being, that they would have to cut back on their own well-being materially in order to be able to realize that others would be able to be brought up? Or do we have to ask people to cut back on material dreams of success, as it were?
Yeah, well, I believe there are different options here, and it might, I believe in a planet of diversity, it might be well for us to pursue this goal in different ways in different places. I know in Spain there's an effort there, a very successful enterprise program, and part of it is that the banks won't let any business fail, and they won't let any person in a particular corporation earn more than 5 times as much as the minimum wage. Well, of course, now I don't say that that's necessarily the right answer. There's been other studies made that if we let the millionaires and billionaires even keep their present wealth,
yes,
but as far as the future is concerned, have a more fair, viable program, that we can still provide a great future for all the people on our planet, even if we leave these millionaires with their millions.
Yeah, you could bring the have-nots up without necessarily bringing the haves down.
That's right.
That there would be a pattern that would be possible. It would be possible to have a pattern where the have-nots could be brought up without bringing the have-nots down if the broader reality were one where there's a general understanding of sufficiency.
That's correct.
If there's scarcity, in order for one group to benefit, another group has to necessarily lose within a condition of scarcity.
We've got to get away from that. Now,
well, the point is that we have lived in
for centuries,
that ever since we first came out of the primordial ooze. I mean, we've lived in a condition, apparently, we've lived in a condition of scarcity, and that the transition that we're experiencing now through technological augmentation is perhaps transcending the need to see scarcity as a reality in which we base our concepts of human nature and also our human institutions. That would be an absolutely major transition.
Yeah, and if we look at it, nature is bountiful. You plant one seed and you get 100. And technology is bountiful. There's no reason why we can't change our attitude of mind from scarcity to abundance. My goodness, Roosevelt, that just reminds me, he had this abundant living. He took that from the Bible. But anyway, the abundance of life is available today for our whole planet if we just wake up and see the changes that are needed in order to enjoy it.
And yet, as we look about, let's say, in the American society and other societies, we see more people without homes, more people without food. We see on a world scale all of the problems still plaguing mankind. We see warfare. We see all of the ancient scourges still being afflicted, as it were, in the political contest between various nations and groups, perhaps largely predicated on the general understanding of insufficiency or scarcity as a reality.
That's terribly important. Anything that can be done to document what I just said about the abundance of nature and the abundance of technology should be done. Well, I feel that we must address that issue and get attention to it.
You have a deep sense of ecology, and ecology is intrinsic, of course, to a sense of Earth and so forth, and the ecology are ecologically, systems that would echo logically, but that you have a sense of a whole system. And we said earlier that if they were to have if some were to benefit, I mean, that there's a whole system sense of responsibility for that, and for some to benefit, others would have to necessarily be lost. I said earlier, would it be necessary for there to be a sense of commonality? It would not be necessary, in your estimation, then, for there to be a lessening of the standard of living. If you say the rich could keep what they have, and that the have-nots could be raised to the point where they could also then become rich, or is it inherently wrong for us to think about being, quote-unquote, rich, having the jet, having the ability to move at one's will wherever one wants and not be constrained? There's a popular ad campaign, a world that knows no limits. Now, Merrill Lynch, I think, features that as their concept. Do you understand? Is there a concept of freedom that, in a material sense, that is perhaps in a moralistic sense, maybe people would argue that it's intrinsically in a, that there are limits to freedom that can't be realized within a morally well-defined, ecologically reasonable kind of context.
Here
It's
again,
a dilemma of freedom, I
yeah,
guess, in
right.
a material sense.
I personally would agree with the idea of limiting our wealth, but I think that if we want to build the future, we've got to find agreement with the rich as well as with the poor. We mustn't go against them. And I think that looking for solutions that appeals on all sides is the most productive. Our real problem has been that in these social inequities, we've been like somebody putting Band-Aids on a cancer. We haven't gone to the root of the problem. There must be changes in structures and systems, financially, politically, economically, and these new systems are not what we found in communism or socialism or enterprise. I think they must go back to something that is more fundamental, and that is stewardship and care of our planet, recognizing that as we provide fair ways. In fact, that's a wonderful word in a book that I read. I've forgotten the name of it, but anyway, the idea, a man was telling his son, he said, most of our problems today are caused by a failure of people to just be fair with one another. And if we could see a new ethic of stewardship and care of our planet, and what I've said is earth care and earth fare, F-A-R-E, the benefits of earth. If earth care and earth fare can be combined in equilibrium, then we have a great future.
Yeah, right. We have a future. One of the problems would be that if you're talking about this transition to a system of earth fare, earth care, or a large-scale sense of ecology, or a large sense, the people who are most in a position of responsibility for the institutions on a day-to-day basis would be the people least likely to be able to see that kind of larger-scale vision in a certain sense, because they're so involved within the constraints and the possibilities that the institutions that we've inherited, the White House, the Congress, the various institutions that we've inherited have limitations built into them and predicated upon the assumptions in which they were built. Do you understand? So where's the vision going to come from? And it would almost be very difficult for it to come from the people who are in positions of leadership.
No, I think the answer again to that
as we normally define leadership.
I remember a leading environmentalist having an opportunity, I won't mention his name, to speak to a group of industrial leaders. I thought his speech was beautiful. And afterwards, in talking to some of the industrialists in the lobby, I discovered they said, everything that guy said, I'm against. But I realized where he'd failed was to speak to them with some approval of something they were doing. The adversarial approach that is so common in the world today, we've got to find a new way. We've got to learn a little bit about how peace works. If I listen to my adversary real hard and find something important to him that I can honestly agree with, then I enthusiastically speak of it.
Yes, sir,
And why then suddenly we're on the same side, and there's not just a battle of words, but real communication of meaning. And that's, of course, getting back to semantics. So I think that the way to deal with the problem that you're referring to there as far as leadership is concerned, a few people, as we get a few leaders, I don't know enough about him, but Robert O. Anderson is quite an industrial leader, and he did a lot for the environment. Anyway, if we get some of these leaders to see that the way to achieve creative change is to look carefully, honestly, for what you can approve in your adversary, whether it's Begin in Israel or whether it's Gorbachev or whoever. And if you look real hard for what you can honestly approve and praise it and express your willingness to cooperate to further this common goal.
Love your enemy?
Right.
As some have said,
Yes.
But, it's a tough thing usually, but
Yeah, but now this, I'm not suggesting that we ignore our differences. We have to honestly face them. But I remember a wonderful book Felix Adler wrote years ago that in any situation, whether it's in a family or in a country or in business, if you have an overarching goal that is deeply shared by adversaries, a strange phenomena occurs. you find that you communicate better, you find better ways to adjust your differences, and you're more willing to have honest, appropriate compromise. So I think we need a little education along the line of peace. Peace means to agree.
Yeah, right, indeed. You
So
know.
finding honest agreement with your adversary is the way to peace.
Yeah, well, obviously, and that has been the case, I think, probably throughout the whole of the experience. That's been the basis for successful diplomacy and that sort of thing.
Right.
We have the United Nations. But I wonder also if it might not be that there could be, if you have a condition, back again, I don't want to harp on it, or anything, but back to the condition of an opening upon a non-destructive millennial capability that could be the legacy of our time to the future generations and so forth in a certain sense. That if you're opening on that, if you're in a context of sufficiency, it really is possible to see a situation in which you could present alternatives to people responsible for historical institutions in a fulfilling way where they could go along with the change themselves without seeing it in a political dialectic which is in a certain sense going to destroy all of these things they have built and the sense of responsibility that they have for these inherited organizations. There has to be a presentation of an alternative that can involve everyone in a certain sense. Is that reaching for too much
No,
or too difficult?
I believe that's absolutely necessary. In fact, I wrote a little paper here just recently about secrecy. Right now, from you mentioned Jim Baker to Hart and all the rest, we find over and over again that there's so much in Wall Street in politics. And
yeah,
of course
the problem of ethics now is really serious. Yeah.
And of course, in our military programs, why we just take for granted keeping secrets. Well, now there is I think there's a right to privacy, and there's a place for privacy, and certainly there are secrets of the heart that need to be respected. But in general, I think it'd be a great thing if we sought not just open skies, as Eisenhower proposed, but an open world, where all over the world we would just take it for granted that it was obscene to further certain military or political or financial secrets.
Money is made with secrets, right? I mean,
right.
Secrets is the essence of scarcity in a certain sense.
Well, in our new abundant future, in fact, I remember some counterculture groups out in San Francisco back at the time of the first Earth Day, and I was so delighted. They were doing something that most businessmen would never think of doing. They were printing leaflets telling their customers how much money they made on each product and how much they were paid and how much profit went to the owners.
Oh, because they were trying to show the reasonableness of it all, I presume. Right, yeah, right.
So that was openness. And by George, they thrived.
Yeah.
So maybe we should explore the possibilities of an open world. But again, I've used the example. There are changes in history, in attitudes. There was a time a few hundred years ago when if somebody committed a terrible crime, why, you'd go out and burn him at the stake. Now, I don't care how terrible a crime, whether it's somebody with an PLO or some terrible act of violence, you couldn't get anybody today to support the idea of burning them at the stake.
No, not hardly. No,
we've changed our attitude on certain things. I think it's possible to keep changing attitudes so that secrecy would be an unthinkable thing. Or, as far as that's concerned, atomic bombs, atomic weapons, or military weapons. Someday, why, we would totally reject any move toward that kind of action.
Yeah, it might be that.
Now, maybe that's too utopian, but anyway, I think somewhere down the line we'll have to come to it.
Well, it's possible to see that we could see a world that very quickly, particularly if the metaphor of birth or the metaphor of gestating throughout the human experience up to the point where we're now to leave the womb of the human experience that we've had over 200,000 years or however long it is, and we're moving into some new way of being, there's likely to be some very, very real changes that could emerge that would be not seen. It'd be hard to anticipate. Buckminster Fuller used to talk about synergy being the behavior of systems unpredicted by the sum of its parts. If we had a world of maximally engaged human beings rather than largely alienated to the degree that so many are now and unable to realize their full potential, there might be a resonancy that would interaccommodate us to universe at a level transcendent to what we've been throughout the human experience. We're moving into some new way of being or relating to the universe that we've not been in throughout this human experience. But there'd be tremendous changes from attitudes that are held to be sacrosanct now It might be that anyone who would profiteer at their neighbor's benefit or look askance at the needs of the poor would be so outmoded, as today it's so well accepted as almost the norm. I don't want to go too far away. I mean, so there'd be a major change that could occur from the attitudes that are so manifest now. You've been concerned and had a great deal of concern with the United Nations. That's a major institution that tries to bring an overarching political view to the world affairs and so forth. But I'm wondering, do you have faith in the United Nations generally? And wonder if you could comment on the United Nations as an institution.
Well, the United Nations is a reflection of our global virtues and faults. I think the most wonderful, responsible leaders and actions are taking place in the United Nations, and I'm very close to a lot that's happening there, and it's terrible, some of the things that are occurring. So, again, Robert Mueller.
Yes,
you know him.
Vice Chairman.
I just wish that what he has said, what he's documented about the benefit of the United Nations, as he said over and over again, he really expected after World War II that before he died we'd have a third world war. And he says we haven't had it, and the reason we haven't had it is because of the United Nations. And I think that's true. Now, we have an increase of the complexity of problems, but certainly I think there's a great need for supporting and encouraging the United Nations. And at the same time, I believe in the value of the balance of powers, which was part of our own country's history. And I think that, in fact, just to pursue that a little bit, with Earth Day, I got the support of UTHAT, and we had a beautiful program there, and it was on 60 TV stations for 12 hours.
Yes,
back in 1972.
Yes.
But we've never asked for Earth Day to be an official United Nations holiday.
All right.
So that people who are aware of some of the things that are wrong in the United Nations, they can still support the idea of Earth Day, and they can do things about Earth Day.
Yeah.
And somewhere in the future, I hope that Earth Day will be sufficiently supported that the United Nations can add their support in a way that will really make it global. Well,
again, that's a historically inherited institution that we have in a certain sense. We have longer ones. We're rooted 200 years, and I guess our thinking goes back, the United States, I mean, in a sense, goes back to the 18th century, I guess. Marxian thinking goes back to the 19th century. There's new things coming along all the time, and we have these political institutions and assumptions where a lot of these things are worked out. But again, you're also interested in the media, or the possibility of the media as someone, in a certain sense, outside of the established institutions where maybe some of these ideas could be discussed, and where there's not the ongoing responsibility of people who are in charge of institutions on a day-to-day basis, but where some of these ideas could be discussed and brought up, an alternate context to the context that is normally assumed. Do you think it's important to pursue the media? And of course, you have the Star of Hope idea that goes back from the beginning of the space age, right?
No, it's terribly important. The media is one of the most vital elements if we're going to build a future. I attended the American Publishers Association meeting at the Waldorf
just recently, yes,
recently.
Right.
And here again, the president and founder, I guess it's chairman and founder of the Publishers magazine, he had written a wonderful story about the Star of Hope. And I'll never forget, back at that time, I was publishing a weekly paper in North Carolina. And I had many conversations with Bob Bunnell, who was publishing a big city paper. Mine was just a weekly. He was the Asheville Citizen. He'd formerly been head of the AP Bureau in Europe.
Right.
And we used to have very interesting conversations. He was telling me, he said, John, you know, your idealism is great, but if you want to stay in business, you've got to give the people what they want. And, you know...
You've heard that before, huh?
Yeah, and so I remember another person told me, he said that if you want to keep your ratings up on TV, you've got to give the people hate, fear, violence, and sex.
Well, we largely do.
So, but I told him I just disagreed with that. I said, by the way, I don't know how it happened, but here a few months ago, you carried a story on the front page which stayed there for weeks. And of all things, it was a story about a family whose the parents of 5 children, had been killed in an automobile accident. And the oldest boy had quit school to take care of the kids, and they were living in a shack. And the neighbors jumped in, and they built him a home, and they helped them in straightening out their affairs. The Lions Club came in and assisted. And I said, of all things, you kept that on the front page for, I believe it was several weeks. Well, he went back in his files and he said, you know, John, that's interesting. That story brought more sales than any story we carried. I don't know why the media is so blind to the possibility of dramatizing the cures, the answers, the solutions. You know, you can show a building being blown up, but if somebody had used time-lapse photography now, they could show the building going up in a few minutes on television, and that would be exciting. But why not give excitement to cures and to answers? If we could...
In the media, particularly.
In media
coverage and what,
media,
because that,
I would give anything. In fact, if somebody will come along with a few $1 million, we'll publish a newspaper or start a TV program or station that will show the alternative. If we had an Earth Care TV station.
Earth Care TV station, one that would discuss these issues outside of the normal context, in a certain sense. It would be calling for a different kind of context or general understanding. Are you heartened? There's now being developed by some people here in New York and so forth, an ongoing program that is going to bring the members of the Congress and the lower house of the Soviet system together on an interconnected pattern, and they're going to discuss affairs by television, and it'll be carried here in the United States. You're encouraged by these kind of developments?
Well, we've been urging that for 30 years. So,
yeah. So that there could be decision-making being made in the air and shared with the people via television. Political process has largely become, hasn't it largely become a matter of media, and particularly television? In the American experience, increasingly it's a matter of television coverage of these events. Some of these events could be discussed more and more in the media, perhaps without all of the weight of the day-to-day responsibility of people at the White House and in positions of major institutional responsibility.
The reason media has such a responsibility, it's really public opinion that changes the world. And the public opinion is formed by the media and by the way they handle events. And unfortunately, they are conditioned to foster violence and destruction and all that is bad in society. And I really believe...
That's called news,
That's called news.
That's at the interface between two events. It seems to be major rather than just moving along tranquilly as things seem to be.
Well, here again, I'd like to see headlines on the front page and excitement about any new cure, any new action for the care and trusteeship of planet Earth, any new effort or program that is succeeding in providing the disinherited poor a stake in the planet. If they'd fill the front page with these kind of headlines.
Maybe there aren't enough of those to go around. There isn't enough news. There aren't enough good stories to go around, maybe.
Well,
maybe I'm just being facetious in a sense.
No, there's enough to move in this direction, and once they've moved in that direction, why, that would multiply those stories tremendously. But now, we need to be informed about the problems. We need to be informed about the violence and all the other things. I think that every time there's a terrible murder, we should have a psychiatrist tell the story on the 5th page, not blast it out on the front page. People should be informed, but their priorities should be changed. We should get Earth care, peace, and the care of Earth should be the first on the first front page, and we should get excited again about this new role of being custodians and caretakers or trustees of our planet.
Well, you certainly have gained the attention of, and the interest of a great number of people. 33 Nobel laureates are on your board or something of that sort? Or, I mean, you've got an illustrious group of people who have been in support of your general thrust and what you've been trying to do here. You've been a star of hope for a great many of us here in the broader world society.
Well, here's one thing that frustrates me. If you know of a scholar or a Nobel laureate or somebody who would help us develop that further, that would be great. Margaret Mead was responsible for us getting those 33 Nobel laureates, and a number of them wrote wonderful statements and essays. Harold Urey wrote a great thing about Earth Day. Well, now, you've never heard of that, of course. Here again, I don't understand myself why the exciting, important, creative alternatives that could provide a better future are so easily bypassed.
It does seem to have been, maybe it's just a phase. Arthur Schlesinger wrote recently that things go in phases politically, and maybe these things go in phases. You also had Buckminster Fuller, who was very helpful and worked a great deal, particularly in his later years, with you on this. And his world game and his ideas of world game and some of the broader systems understandings that came out of that might be well grist for the mill of the world consciousness. He was very concerned with that transition from scarcity to a possibility of sufficiency or surplus. And it's interesting that we don't hear discussions from the scientific community about some of these possible broader epistemological or ontological facts which could provide a different context than the one in which we limp along. And do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes,
There's not enough discussion of some of these alternative, larger views of what the realities are.
That reminds me, Dr. Forrester wrote...
J. Forrester.
J. Forrester wrote World Dynamics.
Yes.
And I have found this so useful. I just can't get over the number of times I go into a class or speak to a group about exponential phenomena. I get excited at the idea that if we can find something sufficiently simple and contagious, how quickly it can spread worldwide.
We live in an exponential age, don't we?
Absolutely.
Population, information, destructive capability. On all fronts, we live at a time of exponential increase of our capability and fulfilling of our period. Certainly is an exciting time now,
That's right.
the most exciting ever. And again, back to that general thesis that this is a time of major decision and change in terms of the broader. In this generational period right now, this is a time of major change. I can't think of a voice that's been more active in trying to keep alive a broad sense of responsibility for these things. And I wonder, along with you, when maybe the spark will be able to be reignited of perhaps among some of the young people, and maybe, I don't know why it is that there's so much of a concern for the self and so forth. Maybe it's just a phase in the broader context of the evolution of things, and that idealism will come back again, do you think? Maybe an idealistic swing will be coming back.
Well,
you
on
know?
a personal note,
the young people have become so materialistic and self-centered and so forth, seemingly. Yeah.
Well, on a personal note, could I just mention that in regard to this whole idea of Earth Care and the Star of Hope, if anybody likes the idea of everybody having an Earth Care project, and of an exponential spread of participation through telephone or other means, or other computers through modems and all the rest, if we can get these ideas across, people that want to be trustees of planet Earth in their own way, with an Earth Care project in their neighborhood or helping save the whales or whatever, if they will make some little statement that I want to be a trustee of planet Earth and work for peace and the care of Earth, for peace, justice, and the care of Earth, if they will just send a card to us, and by the way, it would be to the Earth Society Foundation, 585 Fifth Avenue, New York, 10017. Why, we're going to find some way to keep track of these names.
All right.
And we'll put them on a memory bank, and it'll help us get that star up in the sky.
That star of hope, which you've been thinking about for so long, and well, it ought to be up there. Make some of those stars that are up there stars of hope. Well, sir, it's been a pleasure. I'm sorry we could go on and talk in great length, but I want to thank you very, very much for participating here in the conversation, sir. It's been a great pleasure and honor, and I want to thank you for all your work over the years. It's been a star of hope among the broader world society, the work that you've done, and I wish you all of the best into the bright future you're helping to build here.
Thank you.
I would remind you again, it's been your pleasure to have the perceptions of John McConnell, again, who is the chairman of Earth Society Foundation and the initiator of Earth Day and many other ecologically responsible perceptions here in the United States on a world scale. Happy to have been able to bring you those perceptions, and we here on Conversations invite you to tune in again next week. We'll be coming back then. That's it for this particular segment. We're coming back next week. Mr. McConnell, once again, thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being with you.
Good night. We'll see you next week.